Hi there, my name is Rob Lyons. Thanks for taking a few moments to join me for a video review of the newest Star Trek Discovery novel, Drastic Measures by Dayton Ward. Dayton Ward is a New York Times bestselling author. He's been writing Star Trek novels for 20 years, and this is his first entry into the continuity of Star Trek Discovery. Drastic Measures is set about 10 years before the pilot episodes of The Vulcan Hello and Battle of the Binary Stars. And in this book, we have an opportunity to meet two characters. We get to meet a commander, Philippa Georgiou, before she receives her assignment as commanding officer of the USS Shinjo that we see in the pilots. And we get to meet a lieutenant commander, Gabriel Lorca. And the book is centered in a story that is given, the ultimate conclusion of which is given in the original series episode titled The Conscience of the King, in which we meet Anton Karidian, a Shakespearean actor that Captain Kirk has some suspicions generated through one of his friends, Thomas Langton, and ultimately winds up putting together pieces of the story about who Anton Karidian is. And if you've not seen the episode, go watch it. Maybe after you read the book. As a Star Trek fan, I watched The Conscience of the King for the first time about probably 33 to 36 years ago. Couldn't give you an exact date, but I watched it early on when I became a Star Trek fan, and so very familiar with the story. And it is the story of what happens on the colony of Tarsus 4 in the midst of an agricultural and humanitarian disaster, when difficult decisions have to be made and people's lives are hanging in the balance. It winds up being a really fitting connector for both Philippa Georgiou. It allows us an opportunity to build out her character and understand some of her motivations, her closeness to Starfleet protocol, and her belief in the mission and the value of Starfleet and in the role of the Federation. It gives some heft to who she is in the pilot episode, since we unfortunately only get to see Philippa Georgiou, for essentially 2 hours of screen time in those first two episodes. It also gives us an opportunity to meet Gabriel Lorca and to begin to encounter his story. If you're watching this video and you have been keeping up with Star Trek Discovery, if you've not, this is a spoiler alert, you know that the Gabriel Lorca that we have encountered throughout the first season of Discovery is, in fact, Mirror Lorca. He's from the Mirror Universe. So here we have non-Mirror Lorca. We have the Prime Lorca. We get to learn about him in the context of the crisis that is going on Tarsus 4. So Commander Georgiou is in the midst of preparing for reassignment to another starship. She is drafted very quickly to serve aboard the Narbonne, and she winds up there with a crew that is sent on this somewhat dilapidated cargo ship to bring assistance to the colony at Tarsus 4. Gabriel Lorca serves at a Starfleet base on the planet, and he is drawn in, he's drawn in pretty violently into what is going on there on the planet with regards to this humanitarian crisis. So, first thing I want to talk about is that it is extremely challenging to write a story that many in your audience already think they know the ending to. In fact, we do know how the story ends. If you've watched Conscience of the King even once and have even the vaguest recollection of what happens, you'll know how the story is supposed to end. So Dayton Ward has a challenge, how to make a story that we already know the end of interesting. And he does an outstanding job because he imbues it with some qualities that make Star Trek, when it's at its finest, a sight to behold. And that is, he is able to take contemporary struggles that we are facing and give us the lens of science fiction in order to look back on them and give them some consideration. I'm going to get to that in a moment. In terms of the writing of the two characters one that we definitely know, one that we kind of sort of know, um, from uh, the Discovery on TV. He does a really good job. Uh, we'll start with Georgiou, of channeling how Michelle Yeoh has brought Georgiou to life on the screen. And what's important to note for both situations is Dayton Ward was writing this while before the show ever aired. Uh, to be honest, I don't know if he had an opportunity to go back and do any amendments after he started seeing some of the televised product or anything like that. But he was writing this story contemporaneous with the production, and so the ability to channel somebody that we didn't see much of and who we only saw for a couple hours, he does an outstanding job with that. You could literally see Michelle Yeoh acting out the roles that were put in place for her through Ward's writing. The same is true of Jason Isaacs' portrayal of Lorca. You're able to put the voice, you're able to put the tenor, you're able to put the mannerisms together. And maybe in part that might suffer, or we may see a little bit of presumption in terms of how we are interpreting some of what Lorca does based on his mirror universe persona. But I personally didn't have a problem. I didn't feel that way. I came away maybe with a deeper understanding of who Prime Lorca is and what some of his motivations were. I came back with a real big hope that we get to meet him. If continuity is kept tight, this book was written with the full knowledge of the folks in the writing room at Star Trek Discovery. Hopefully they would respect the canon that's established here, or not canon, but maybe literary canon that's established here for Lorca, because it's a very powerful literary canon. Lorca has a journey in this story that in some ways I feel would be akin to put it in contemporary language, a 9/11 family survivor. Somebody who maybe is watching on TV and sees those towers fall and is torn apart. Has my loved one escaped? Are they deceased? And Lorca is watching these things happen, and he is actively engaged in seeking to bring people to justice. And honestly, it hit me pretty hard. It made me think back to 9/11. It made me think back to what would those families have been going through, the people. Um, Lorca is also an opportunity where, as his arc goes through this book, you get a chance to see that thin line that exists between justice and retribution. Again, very timely. With this Larry Nassar case, for example, there is a fine line that exists um, with any situation that's infamous, where do we cross the line between legitimate justice and retribution? And Lorca has to explore that. I think it may have hit me a little bit stronger because of some of the things that have been going on in the news recently, and seeing that connection. And that's a connection that I drew. I don't know that you'll necessarily draw it, but it's something that I drew, and I was able to draw out, seeking to process things and seeking to understand how do people feel when they're in these situations. By trade, I'm a hospital chaplain. And so this is something I have to work with patients sometimes on a day-to-day basis, or their family members. And again, one of the great things about Star Trek, excuse me, and fiction in general, is it gives us an opportunity to look at things through entertainment, but through that creative lens that is brought to bear. And Dayton Ward does so excellently. We're looking at, stress, trauma, emotional resiliency, these questions of morality. And that's not even to get into the situation on the colony world. We know to an extent, again, from Conscience of the King, what it was. We don't see it overly played out in the story. There's a really great series of vignettes where somebody who survived the event is actually writing in retrospect. And some of those are weaved in throughout the storyline, and those are really neat interjections to the narrative that really do help you realize that sometimes, not always, but sometimes, our desire to classify things as black and white, as opposed to recognizing the shades of gray that sometimes exist in moral and ethical decisions, aren't always apparent to people in the midst of crisis. Ward is able to bring those concepts out into the forefront very well. Getting back to the character of Philippa Georgiou, again, as I said, written very well, and having an opportunity to see somebody who is in a position where she has to make decisions, leadership decisions, decisions upon which the health and vitality of this colony could conceivably rest. Decisions that may affect whether somebody escapes justice. And also for her to have an opportunity to reflect on her role in Starfleet and how she's going to go forward. Again, I felt very much like I was able to connect with the character and understand her a bit more, and therefore to put into context the Philippa Georgiou we see in the first 2 episodes of Star Trek Discovery. One of the areas where I did have a little bit of a challenge was in the visualization of the book. This isn't anything that Dayton Ward did in writing. It's a struggle that I faced with David Mack's book shortly after the premiere, and that is, I think we're typically taking for granted that this is a visual reboot of Star Trek, not a continuity reboot. And I will tell you, this story fits perfectly fine into continuity. There's no continuity issue that I've been able to find in this book whatsoever. But I think most of us who understand the realities of how the entertainment industry are focusing today, this isn't the JJ verse, but this is a visual reboot of classic Star Trek continuity. And there have been some hints that have been put out there by the production team that, hey, as we get to the end of the first season, as we go into the second season, some of the visuals are going to change. And so it's made it a challenge to visualize some things. So there are some points where, for example, colored buttons are mentioned on a control panel. And of course, in my mind, what immediately pops in there is those jelly-style buttons on the original series bridge. And then I find a little bit of a war going on in myself in terms of, is that what it looks like or not? There's an appearance that comes later in the story that is an outstanding callback to both animated series and a couple of early, relatively speaking, Star Trek novels, among them Final Frontier. I'm not saying anything other than that about it, but there is a callback there that, again, struggling to give a visual to it because they're discordant visuals. If you compare what we knew from classic Star Trek continuity to what you know in the current Discovery continuity, things look very different. Starfleet uniforms look different. The bridges look different. The starships look different. So there's some challenge that's there. And again, that's not Dayton Ward's fault. It's just we haven't really seen anything to put the rest of it into context. And so while, yes, I do know that these books have been written with the input of the writer's room and with their blessing, we don't really know what the visuals are going to look like. So that does create a bit of a problem in my mind for me to image the book. And ultimately, I wound up, for the most part, visualizing the book purely in the style of Discovery and kind of pushing out some of the discordant images. I'd be interested to see, maybe halfway through the next season of Discovery, if maybe that my mind would change about how I view that. But in my mind, I purely viewed this through the lens of the way that Star Trek Discovery is being shot and the production design and so forth. The only difference being that perhaps there's a different style of Starfleet uniform in use at the same time as the Discovery Blues are in use. So at any rate, your mileage may vary on that. I'm a very visual-oriented reader. In my mind, as I read, I am creating the universe in my mind. I'm seeing what's happening. I'm visualizing the entire thing like it's an episode, which is one of the beauties of Dayton Ward's writing. He gives you plenty of material with which to construct that. And I think I'm just being a little bit cautious about how I choose to do that visualization. Final thoughts, for a story set 10 years before the pilot of Star Trek Discovery, it provides you with a remarkable sense of the characters that at least one of whom you're going to encounter in Discovery, one of whom I can hope we will get to encounter, but I don't know. I will also say don't disregard the final couple pages. There is a beautiful callback to something that happens earlier in the story, as well as maybe some hope on something that I don't want to talk too much more about because I don't want to spoil it for you. If there is anything about this book where the story does not end the way that you think it ends, it may be in those final, meanwhile, elsewhere kind of pages that come towards the end. So my verdict, wow, great book, loved it, looking forward to more, and I would recommend that you go out and pick it up. So I think the camera's going to flip it backwards, but Drastic Measures, Dayton Ward, it's on sale now. Dayton's been writing for 20 years, so you can be assured of good quality material here. Just an excellent read. Looking forward to some more Star Trek Discovery books. If you follow me on Facebook, you probably know that Saru is my favorite character, or Saru, sorry. I don't know why I keep wanting to pronounce it Saru, but I do. Saru is my favorite character, and we've got a novel coming later this year that focuses on him, so I'm really excited about that. But for the moment, the final thing I will say is this review copy was provided to me by Gallery Books, an imprint of Simon & Schuster, for my unbiased review and opinion. This is my unbiased review and opinion, and I was not given any compensation other than a copy of the book to read in order to provide this. So, my review is thumbs up. Give this book a try. I hope you enjoy it, and I hope this review has been helpful in giving you an opportunity to see why it's a book to check out. Have a wonderful day, evening, night, wherever you may happen to be. Thanks for stopping by and listening to this review.